Title: Whispers of the Forgotten. In May 2000, the coastal Spanish town of Belmonte rested beneath a deepening dusk. Surrounded by jagged cliffs and the haunting whisper of the sea, it was a place where the old and the new intertwined in shadows, where the line between history and legend blurred. Four visitors would soon come to understand this darkness as they ventured into the heart of an ancient secret. The story begins with Maria, a graduate student and aspiring historian, intrigued by rumors surrounding Belmonte. She had unearthed peculiar references to the town's lost monastery, Santa Lucia, an isolated place abandoned in the 1700s under mysterious circumstances. Legends spoke of the place as haunted, forbidden. Locals barely acknowledged its existence, their voices trailing off when questioned. Maria couldn't resist. She invited her closest friend Ana, her brother Javier, and his friend Marcos, a mechanic with a penchant for thrill-seeking. Each of them had their reasons for going. Maria sought knowledge, Ana was driven by loyalty, Javier by a sense of duty, and Marcos by thrill, though none understood the depth of what they would face. As they set off from their hostel on the edge of town, they had no idea they would soon rely on each other in ways they never anticipated. As they neared Santa Lucia, the light began to fade, and the last warm colors of sunset drained from the sky. The monastery sat silent, blanketed in ivy, with broken walls twisting upward like claws. The air grew heavy, and the wind seemed to whisper in a language they couldn't understand. It started with a simple rule: stay together. But from the beginning, it seemed something was working against them, eager to push them apart. Hour 1. The entrance. At the entrance, a great wooden door stood ajar. Maria took a deep breath and crossed the threshold, and the others followed. Inside, the silence felt unnatural, as though the air itself had been stolen away, and every sound they made echoed hollowly back. The four exchanged uneasy glances, but pressed on, their flashlights casting narrow beams that revealed fragments of painted frescoes depicting eerie, almost forgotten saints with missing faces. As they ventured deeper, Maria's head began to pound. She stopped to catch her breath, and Ana pulled out a bottle of water, urging her to drink. For a moment they stayed back while Javier and Marcos drifted ahead, admiring a small, carved altar by candlelight. Then, in a heartbeat, it happened. Javier and Marcos turned the corner, and the room grew chillingly silent. They couldn't see each other anymore, and neither of them dared call out. Alone, each felt a subtle shift, a pressure that chilled them. There was a sense of being watched, and though they couldn't place it, a distant rustling grew louder. Maria and Ana locked hands and started after them, realizing how vulnerable they were, alone. Hour 2. The library. The group found themselves in a vast library, its high shelves stacked with decaying books. There, dust hung in the air like a cloud, and somewhere in the back of their minds, they knew they were being watched. They decided to press on as a group, but found themselves strangely drawn toward different parts of the room. Javier broke off first, his eyes landing on an old text lying open on a table. Something compelled him to read it, the words pulling him into a trance-like state. He felt he could almost understand it, a story of monks who sought forbidden knowledge and the price they paid. Meanwhile, Ana heard a voice, a faint whisper calling her name, pulling her toward the corner of the library. She hesitated but stepped forward, her curiosity stronger than her fear. As she moved, she glanced back, catching sight of Maria and Marcos whispering, their faces tight with worry. Their eyes seemed wrong, as though something else peered through. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The room grew colder, and Maria, feeling the shift, grabbed Ana's arm, dragging her back. Together, they rushed to Javier, breaking his trance. With his mind clearing, Javier looked up, shaken, realizing how deeply the words had grasped him. Hour 3. The bells. Each hour seemed to carry them closer to something unseen, yet terrifyingly familiar. As they left the library, they heard the faint ringing of bells echoing from somewhere above, though they knew no one else was there. Guided by a twisted sense of inevitability, the four made their way up a narrow staircase, the bells growing louder, more invasive with each step. Reaching a small, crumbling bell tower, they found themselves surrounded by a chill so deep it numbed them to the bone. The bells themselves had decayed, rusting at their hinges, yet they seemed to ring, ghostly, filling the space with a dissonant melody. As the bells rang louder, each person felt a sudden urge to run, yet the realization hit them. If any one of them left, the rest would be helpless, overcome by the overpowering whispers that seemed to flood the room. Together they resisted, each fighting the urge to bolt. The presence around them seemed to understand this, a ripple of frustration so thick it made them dizzy. Marcos, who was barely holding his nerve, let out a panicked laugh, breaking the tension, and with that small release, the bells silenced. Hour 4. The Reflections. Making their way to a stone corridor lined with dust-covered mirrors, they hesitated, each struck by the haunting scene. As they passed each mirror, they noticed they were not alone in the reflections. A dark, robed figure seemed to linger behind them, melting into shadows if they looked directly. The group, feeling both paranoid and defiant, decided to keep moving, though each step was harder. In the last mirror, Maria caught her own reflection staring back at her with hollow eyes, a glimpse of something ancient and ravenous. She cried out, reaching for Anna's hand, who turned to comfort her, barely managing to pull her back. The reflections seemed alive, mocking their fear, mimicking their actions in distorted, disturbing ways. Feeling the force pull them apart once more, they clung to each other, stepping away as one. Hour 5, the final door. In a small chamber at the heart of the monastery, they found a door marked with a single word in ancient script, Fidelis, faithful. The whispers had grown louder now, as if begging them to enter, promising them answers. They hesitated, each one feeling the weight of the moment, the terror of what might await. Javier looked at each of them, realizing that alone they would be lost. "We're all in this together," he whispered, placing his hand on the door handle. The door creaked open, and inside they found an altar covered in black candles, their flames flickering, casting strange shapes against the walls. At the altar's base, 4 shadowy forms waited, eyes glowing, eager, empty. The room pulsed with an ancient energy, one that reached out for them, claws ready. In an instant, each felt an invisible grip, pulling them to the altar, drawing them closer to the waiting forms. Yet, just as they felt themselves giving in, Maria screamed, "Together! We stand! Together!" With a strength that surprised even them, they linked hands, defying the grip, clinging to each other despite the terror. The shadows wavered, hesitating, and then, with a final shudder, they faded, the room emptying of its horror as though it had been exorcised. The candles went out, and the 4 stood alone in the darkness, breathing heavily, clutching each other. The door swung shut behind them, and with the last of their strength, they stumbled back out into the monastery halls. Morning had broken outside, and the light of dawn washed over them, filling them with a sense of relief that bordered on disbelief. As they descended the cliffs toward the town, the whispers faded, returning the monastery to silence. They were free. Yet as they parted ways that morning, each knew they would carry the memory of that night forever, and the shadows that nearly claimed them would linger, waiting for those who ventured too close alone.